Web development is such an interesting field in today's world, wherein we just went from making a lot of websites to actually creating a lot of applications that we use when we're connected through the internet. And you would have realized that with every web application that you might have used, your level of convenience with the website that you're handling, with the brand that you're trying to be a customer of, whatever it is, that your role inside, just having the shopping experience increased by a lot, right? A good example to give you about the development of web apps in today's world, take a look at maybe 10 years back, right? Maybe go back to 2012, 2011 or something, when there was a hype for the end of the world, if you remember. And during that time, when web application development was not really the most biggest thing in the world of IT like it is today, then if you take a look at it, you would have figured out that shopping or doing anything with respect to on the internet was very much complex, and it didn't feel like a very homely task back in the day. But now all of us in fact are all used to it, right? We use hundreds and hundreds of web applications today, and all of those applications, they come from frameworks such as Flask. Flask is again one of the world's leading web development frameworks that we have today, and it has been widely incorporated across multiple domains, multiple businesses, individuals, research purposes, everything. And it has proven to always put a big punch in the world of how rapidly you can progress in web application development, right? So as a framework on its own, as a library on its own, Flask is absolutely beautiful to work with. And if you can see the second word, it says Python. Well, of course, at the end of the day, we are allowing Python to bring its really rich environment packed full of libraries, full of capabilities, very easy to use syntax, very powerful at the same time. And our goal here is to make sure that we get Flask to talk to Python. Of course, since it's a library built for Python, you get the best of both worlds, right? In one way, you have the best web application development framework at hand. The other way, you have the best programming language, arguably the best programming language in today's world. And eventually, when you bring these two together, you can create absolutely fantastic products out there, right? Now, in this particular course, we're going to have a section where I'm going to be showing you how you guys, you can look at various brands and various companies that you definitely have heard of, that they make use of Flask on a daily basis. It'll be a very interesting course, guys. Since Flask is a concept that has been trending non-stop recently, we have to make sure that you guys understand this thoroughly and you get the fundamentals cleared and sorted out. And with that, we present to you this course on Flask and Python. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, I want to request you to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. This is done to make sure you do not miss out on any of the new updates or video releases from Great Learning. And of course, guys, if you enjoy this video, show us some love and do like this video. Knowledge increases by sharing, right? So make sure you share this video with your friends, colleague, and everyone who can make use of it. And at the end of it, make sure to comment on the video if you have any queries or any suggestions, and I'll be more than happy to respond to all of your comments. Well, my name is Anirudh Rao, guys. What are we waiting for? Let's check out the agenda for this course. Now, taking a look at the agenda, you might see that we are going right to the basics, right? Now, it is very important when you attack a library, any library in Python, you have to have a very structured approach of learning it. Now, there are multiple paths and multiple iterations through which you can learn these concepts. And in my opinion, the first iteration, the foundations, the fundamentals are really the most important ones, because if you clear all of these concepts, right, down the line, you will never have to revisit them again, because since it's foundational, you will always have it at the back of your mind. Now, if your foundation is not very strong, as you might have had in a domain which you might have not liked, or maybe, if you've been working in a sector which you're not really a fan of, you will realize that it becomes very difficult later down the line, right? So to ensure that you guys have a very, very strong foundation, we're going to go right down to the basics, to the introduction to web frameworks. We're going to understand what web frameworks are, why we require it, and its importance in today's world. Once we're clear with that, I'm very sure you'll be very much interested to get started with Flask. So we'll take a quick introduction to understanding everything there is to know about the framework. Why is Flask considered so important? How is it having an impact in today's world of web application development and all of that? And once we understand what Flask is and how it is trying to help us and how it is helping us create beautiful applications out there, we're going to dive into a section where, I can show you how you guys can install Flask in a very easy manner. Now, if you've clicked on this video, I am sure you might have had a bit of experience working with Python. And if you've worked with Python previously, I can tell you that installing Flask is a piece of cake, right? Now, do not worry, guys. We will not be discussing a lot of code, or we'll not be discussing something really complex. In case if you guys have never worked with Flask or never worked with Python, the goal here is to make sure you have an introduction to the library through which you can work with later on, right? So we're going to have a section where we're actually diving into the heart of Flask, understanding a couple of important concepts that govern the domain. And at the same time, if you're about to learn Flask, there is always a question. Every time I've had to give a lecture about Flask or talk to someone about Flask, they always come back with one simple question. They say, hey Anirudh, okay, if you're trying to help us understand what Flask is it better than this other framework that we have? The other framework is called Django, if you might be aware. There comes a time where you'll be confused maybe down the line if you have to pick up Flask, if you have to pick up Django, or which one should you go about using for your requirements. To make sure to give you a little bit about the fundamental differences that exist between Flask and Django, we're going to have a section where we'll discuss about 5 to 6 really important comparison points between them. Now, after that, I'm very sure that you guys will have complete clarity about what is required when for the type of solution that you guys are looking to build, when you go on to learn further in terms of Flask, and to give you a hindsight, to give you an insight about what you can actually build about it. We can actually take a look at a section where we'll discuss the multiple applications that we have, in the case of Flask, and it's going to be really interesting and fun there, right? Now, in the last section, we're going to be discussing the advantages and the disadvantages of Flask as well, because at the end of the day, it becomes very important for you to know the capabilities of the library, to know the capabilities of the framework, right? Now, what I mean by that is basically you need to know what Flask can do really well, yet at the same time, you need to know what Flask, there are certain things that Flask cannot do that well as well, right? So you need to know that, and it's very important as a developer, very important as a learner for you to actually understand that. Right? Well, guys, with this, I hope we really are clear with the course agenda for this course, Flask in Python, and I think it's high time we get started with the first item on the agenda, which is Introduction to Web Frameworks. Alright, guys, coming to Introduction to Web Frameworks. Now, web frameworks are these really powerful entities which we've been using the products of for a really long time, I can assure you that. Now, to give you an overview of where you might have been in a situation where you've used the product built out of a web framework, let's just think of a situation where, you may be swiping on your Instagram, you're taking a break from work, you're relaxing, and you're just trying to open the application Instagram, you're trying to swipe, you're trying to refresh, you're trying to watch reels, you're doing a lot of these things, right? Now, if you've ever been very observant with any of these social media sites like Snapchat, Facebook, or Instagram or anything, it's reactive to what you do, right? It will generate content, or it will showcase content in an order based on your activity in the app, based on what you like, based on, it'll not show you things that you're not really into, right? If you love reading books and you keep searching books on Instagram, for some reason, it will only start recommending books to you, right? It's not going to recommend some horror documentary for you to see posts of facts and anything like that. No, it doesn't happen. It might happen in 1 or 2 cases where Instagram is trying to check if you'd be interested in that. But at the end of the day, Instagram as an application, it's not static. It's not just one page or one feed that it is showing the entire world. Impossible, right? Even though it's the same content. Let's just say that there's a celebrity who posted something. Of course, it's going to be the same for anyone watching through the Instagram app anywhere across the world. But at the end of the day, how it is served to you, how you actually get to see it on your phone, and how Instagram basically decided to show you the content is going to be very, very different, right? Sometimes it might recommend opened it. There are other times where someone might have shared it to you. There's many ways, and you have to understand that in the back end, for this to work, for something to be dynamic, for something to be actually analyzing and assessing what you are doing and then reciprocate to that and then add value to that, right? That's how these social media sites become really engaging. We sort of feel very comfortable on social media because of this exact fact, that whatever you are doing, it feels like you're talking to a computer, you're working on your phone. There are many intelligent AI based bots, and there are again technologies like web frameworks and a lot more, which are making your experience feel so personalized and feel so really well that you would love to do more of it, right? Now think about the technical aspect of all of everything that I've just said. It all the data that Instagram has to show you, or any other app for example, it has to retrieve everything from servers which are stored around the world, and eventually it'll have to query these servers for data. It'll have to receive certain data. It has to show you the data. Now you will go on to interact with the app. You're texting a friend, you're sending memes, whatnot, right? So it has to take all these data back and update it back in the databases to see what your activity is, what you're doing and whatnot, right? Now this becomes really important for you to understand, because implementing a concept such as these is what the challenge of web frameworks actually solved for us. There was a time when we had a very split division between static websites and dynamic websites. Static websites, regardless of what you would do, it had its own set of code and it would work only one single way for anyone in the entire world. Dynamic websites, however, are very different. They can be reactive and they can focus on customizing your own experience with respect to the brand, the product, e-commerce site, whatever it is that you're using, right? You'll be surprised to know that even if you're not a shopper, even if you don't consider yourself to be a person who shops on the internet, you will be very curious to understand that there are almost everyone in the entire world out there who are trying to offer products or services that they use web frameworks out there, right? Now, the most important thing was this question, right? What if your Instagram app or any other app could never do any sort of real-time processing or real-time data retrieval? It would be really boring, right? Maybe if I post something on my Instagram today and you get to see it tomorrow morning because the servers had to upgrade overnight or something like that, it wouldn't make real sense. I mean, of course, it has its own vibe and all of that, but at the end of the day, it really doesn't make sense, right? But what you have to also understand is that approach where things are static, right? When things are static, they work really quick and they are a lot simpler to not just build and create, but to maintain and manage later down the line as well, right? It actually is very simple. It actually is very fast to work with. But the downside is that you lose a lot of personalization and you lose a lot of features, a lot of almost real-time or actually real-time features, which again do not make sense, especially if you're a person who likes to watch cricket or anything on your mobile phone. And imagine that there's like a 1 hour delay between the actual match and your phone. Do you think you'd still be interested and you'd be all hyped up? Not really, right? You'll definitely move to another application which might do things quicker than these ones. So even though in certain cases web frameworks are associated to being actually slower, but you have to understand that there is so much complexity that's going on in the background to retrieve multiple points of data across multiple sources and eventually bring it back, retrieve it. And it's not just it's bringing the data back to the client side and it's just holding it there, right? It has to serve the data to you in a right way. So there has to be logic written to ensure that the data gets served to you, not just served to you, but served to you in a way that makes it correct, right? It's not like it's just throwing random database queries at you and saying, hey, here's the photo that you wanted. Not really. It doesn't work like that, right? Now, one really important thing that everyone has to understand about the world of web frameworks is that whenever you talk about web frameworks, there is usually two big divisions, right? Every web application ecosystem in the entire world has two sides. It's called as a client-server architecture. You might have heard of it, where a lot of processing happens on the server side and only the information that's required by each of these individual clients. Basically, what happens is that these clients keep pinging one common server, right? There can be 100 clients, there can be 1,000 clients. Now, for a fact, you might know that there are millions of users, right? In fact, I think Facebook had a couple of billions of users or something. So they cannot have one server for everyone. They cannot have a billion server around the world and you cannot get your own customized server where all your data is stored. Not really, right? So a mass of people connect to one particular server, and with these big companies, it is never one server. They usually have one or two servers in every city with almost every countries around the world. So it is diversified, but not to a point where each of us get our own servers, right? That hasn't happened yet. Now, an important thing you have to understand about client side and server side functionality is for a fact that it is very, very, very different. A server is a very powerful machine which has the capability to not just serve one person. It has the computing power, it has the processing power, and at the end of the day, it has the capability to serve a lot more people, right? So what happens on the client side is very simple. Whenever there is any sort of interaction that the client does, when I say a client, it is basically you sitting, wherever it is that you're watching this particular course right now, you are a client, because the video that you're watching right now is stored in a server and it is being fed to you. It is being served to you like how food would be served in a restaurant, right? Think about it that way. So what happens is that the code gets executed on the user's browser, and in your case, the browser might be Chrome, Firefox, or whatever it is, and it gives you a user interface. Right now, wherever you're watching this course, there is a user interface around you. You would have come to our website to actually go on to watch this particular course, right? Great Learning Academy. Similarly, this thing, all the data of Great Learning Academy is impossible to be stored on your laptop, my laptop, or hundreds of laptops, because we have a ton of content, right? Now, all that content is basically stored on our server, and a lot of magic has to happen on the server side as well. When you take a look at it, your client just asks questions and it gets all the answers from the server. Now, to ask questions and get answers, there's one step in the middle which is missing, which is basically processing, right? Which is basically your whatever questions you ask, there has to be some sort of thinking, there has to be some sort of analytical application that is going on in the background, in the back end, to attach logic to your question and eventually serve you with a particular answer. Now, all the data that the client requires can actually be stored on the server. Any and every data that is required to design the system, that is required to build your application, that is required to host your application, and even to the capability of you testing your application. Everything that's needed for everything that I just said will be stored on the server. Now, there are multiple softwares called middlewares wherein your client side will have a capability to talk to your server side very easily. It's not as easy as connecting one wire and be done with it. Well, in today's world of internet, it actually is. But at the end of the day, there's a lot more complexity that goes on in the background. But what you should know at this moment is whenever you're trying to use a web application, you have to understand that whatever you're doing, you're as a client, and every single interaction that you do can actually be recorded, and your behavior, your analysis, the products that you buy, the way in which you buy, every minute thing can be in detail assessed, because all your data can get stored on the servers as well. And of course, the server is not just trying to save your data, right? It's not trying to steal your data or anything as such. It's just trying to do it to probably help you better, make better recommendations or anything, be it on Amazon, be it on Netflix, be it anywhere across, right? So it becomes very, very important for you to know. If that's the case, then what is the definition? What is the actual definition of what a web framework would be? Well, a web framework is basically a collection of various tools, guys. We consider it to be an architecture because at the end of the day, it provides you a ton of tools. It's not just one tool that you go about using. It's not just one technique that you're using here. It's a variety of technique, variety of libraries, and there's so many things that you're given, right? Think of it like a bag of goodies, bag of gifts for a developer that you can actually use to develop your application, right? Now, everything that you would require to build and maintain even extremely large online applications, it's actually all the core functionality is provided by these web frameworks. All you have to do is you have to build your own logic on top of it, add your own flavor to whatever product that it is that you're offering, and eventually get it out there, right? Now, you might be asking a question at this moment of time saying, hey, if everyone is just building their own products, they can just do it in their own ways. Why do you even require a framework to go about doing it? One really important thing as a developer, as a programmer, or as a web developer, you have to understand that writing a web application is not really simple. It is an extremely complex task. Now, usually there's a lot of code whenever the term complex is thrown around in the world of information technology, right? So what happens here is that the advantage that web frameworks provide to you is they're like these helpers which will make sure that you write a small amount of code. You writing this much code will have this big of an impact overall, right? That is again one of the really big reasons of why you would want to consider it. If you are a programmer and if you're trying to solve an application, if one guy can do it in 100 lines with the use of a web framework, the other guy has to write 2,500 lines of Python code. Which guy would you prefer to be? A simple question, right? So code reusability, you write the code once and you use it multiple times anywhere you require. And this kind of an approach not just makes your task as a programmer or as a developer faster, but for the actual program itself that it is running, since the code becomes small and it knows that it has to reuse certain parts of it, think of efficiency and think of how fast the website or the web app will be able to run now, because it doesn't have to do a lot of processing, right? I'll give you a simple example. This turns me down a lot, but let me know your opinion. Whenever you try to open a web application, whenever you go on to try to, open something, let's say such as Netflix or Prime or anything, just giving you a hypothetical example. If these websites, right, they load lightning fast, let's just be honest with each other. It's never that they are the bottleneck, right? If something is slow, 90% of the time we say, hey, our internet might be busted or something like that. But when you think about it, if these websites were really slow, let's just say I open this website right now and it probably takes even somewhere around 30-35 seconds to open, right? It's not really a lot. 30 seconds is not a lot of time. But at the end of the day, if you actually understand and analyze it, we are so used to having really fast internet and really fast technologies around us, where waiting for 30 seconds to open a website, that website will lose the customer's business, right? Because there's someone else where you type in the name, hit enter, boom, their website is ready for you to see. Even a matter of 30 seconds. Now, my entire sentence lasted 30 seconds here, and you probably didn't think that 30 seconds is a lot of time, but loading times, if they are shorter, they lead to increase in revenues worth in millions of dollars. And if your loading time becomes high or something is fishy, something is not right, that will just tank your entire company's wealth. It has happened in many cases. You can actually Google about it. There are a lot of companies who have lost a ton of business, billions of dollars worth of business, just because of the fact that, there's a client who went to a competitor because something was slow, something was not right with their web application or whatever it is, right? It is that critical. So code reusability becomes a very, very important part of it. Now, an important part that you have to understand about web frameworks is that it does involve a lot of coding, right? Now, when you have to create an entire backend, when you have to create an entire server and ensures that it provides everything that is needed for the application to run, you require some sort of a server-side language. It's called a scripting language or whatever it is, where you have to sit and code the server. You have to teach the server what it has to do and how it has to be able to serve these clients, right? Now, one advantage that you get with web frameworks is that Python is, again, one of the world's most popular programming languages that we have today, and it is providing you complete support to be used with respect to frameworks such as Django and frameworks such as Flask for this exact purpose. So you're already taking a very complex process and simplifying it using web frameworks. Now I'm telling you, hey, you can further simplify the usage of this web framework with an easy to use programming language such as Python to help you completely get up and get started with whatever application that it is that you're designing. I don't think anyone would say no to that, right? Because that at the end of the day is the entire essence of how you can simplify something really complex and yet at the same time create a beautiful application or a beautiful solution to a problem using that. Right? Fantastic, guys. So that was the introduction to web frameworks. In this next section, we're going to take a look at the introduction to Flask. Now, Flask as a library on its own is a beautiful framework to work with. The best part about Flask, now, I know that some of you all are thinking, oh, so Flask can do a lot. So it must be a very heavy framework to learn. It must be really complex. It must be very hard and all of that. Well, to your surprise, I can actually tell you that Flask is a very lightweight framework that has the capability to in fact, it provides a wide variety of tools and techniques through which you can use to build any application that you want. Now, some of you all might be thinking, oh, can we only build really small applications, or how is it? Well, you can build an application as small as you want or an application as large as you want. As long as you have the hardware to support everything that you're building, Flask will always be there to ensure that you can do something faster, better. The best part is you can do all of it in an easier manner, right? So, how is Flask so lightweight? A web framework has to be very heavy and dense because it consists of so many things. The advantage that Flask has is that its entire core functionality becomes light because of the fact that it depends on two other libraries to help it work, right? It's not like Flask is working standalone. Flask asks the help of two other external libraries. It's called Jinja2 or Jinga2, however you want to call it. And it uses a template, and there's something else called as the WorksGuic, WSGI toolkit to function. As you can see, it requires the power of a templating tool and it requires the power of a toolkit to actually complete its its own architecture, its own cycle of usage, and eventually through these we make a lot of sense, and we at the end of the day have a lot of capabilities to build tasks easily, right? Now I know for a fact that all of you guys are saying like, okay, so what is WSGI, Workzug, Ginger 2? Like, you've never heard of it probably, and you might be very, very confused at this moment to see these new fancy letters and terms. Well, let me tell you that WSGI basically stands for a web server gateway interface. Now, what it is used as is basically a standard. It is used as a standard for the creation between an interface that exists between your actual server and your web application. Now, again, let me quickly take you back to that Instagram example. Every time you open Instagram, do you see a bunch of code? Do you see a lot of servers? Do you see a lot of databases? Not really. You actually see a web application, and all that data it is getting, everything is happening in the background, right? Whatever you see is what the app wants you to see as a user interface, but there has to be an interface which brings data from the server to your application, and that is what WSGI is actually responsible for. Right? Fantastic. Now, the next key term that you would have not heard is Workzug. Workzug basically is a toolkit that is used to implement the concept of request and response and many, many other utility functions as well. Now, this becomes a foundational concept because let me tell you this, when you open Instagram and let's just say you're trying to stalk your best friend or someone, you have to enter their name and hit search. So basically what you're saying is, hey Instagram, I request you to basically show me the details of this person. You send a request to the server saying, hey, I need the details of this person. And what does the server say? If you are authorized, if you follow that person, if that person has a private profile, whatever it is, if everything is all right, the server will say, hey, thank you for your request. Here is my response. Now here is this person's profile. Sit and stalk till you are happy. Something like that, right? So when you have the capability to actually tell the server that I'm requesting something and to get something from the server as a response back and many, many other utility tasks, Workzug is very, very critical in that as a library, right? And then we have Ginger 2. Ginger 2 basically is a templating engine that's built for Python. Now, whenever you say a templating engine, think about this, right? Whenever you hit refresh on a web page, whenever you move to another web page in a website, or whatever tasks that you do on YouTube or wherever it is, you will see that every time you try to do something, most of the elements there will have to be re-rendered, right? It's very simple. Go to YouTube right now, keep hitting refresh multiple times. The entire interface of YouTube will not refresh, right? It's only those videos which are refreshing. Everything else is remaining constant because you're not trying to refresh the entire architecture of YouTube there. You're just trying to refresh the videos that YouTube has to show to you. So there's a bit of static and there's a bit of dynamic flavor that's present in the web application there. And all of these usually happen whenever you make use of templating engines, and Ginger 2 is beautiful at doing that, especially if you are working with Flask, right? So I hope with this slide, you're very clear about these very three terms, which might seem really funky to a beginner, because trust me, when back in the day when I had to learn these terms and when I saw this for the first time as well, even I was wondering, well, whoa, what is WSGI? Why have I never heard of it, right? Well, you don't have to face any of that right now because you guys know what all of these are. So the next question one might be asking is saying, okay, so for what tasks would you go on to use Flask? There are many, many tasks. When you say building a web application, you can work on supporting secure cookies. Your cookies don't have to be, unsecure anymore. You have to, if you understand the importance of cookies, you will know how important this first point is. Now, whenever there is any sort of situation wherein there is a requirement for fast debugging, you create an application and you have to take it live. Before you take it live, what do? It goes through rigorous amount of testing, right? Now, testing is a process on its own and debugging is another headache of its own. A web framework is considered very good if it can provide you fantastic methods to not only just build your application, but at the same time provide you ways of how you can debug this application, right? Let's be very honest here, even the most really talented and really amazing programmers among us, we make a small amount of mistakes every now and then, right? Every time you run a code, it is going to throw you some error. It's going to be a very silly error or it's going to be a very complex error, but you do get that error and you have to solve it. You have to fix it. How is the web development framework helping you solve that? Well, Flask seems to be doing it at a really good pace. Third point says Ginger to templating. We already took a look at Ginger to templating and we understand what it does in terms of rendering these dynamic web pages for us. And whenever you have a client or whenever you have a requirement that says, hey, the web application I want to build, I want to take a modular approach to building this tool. It's not like there is an all hands collaboration. Everyone is just working on it haphazardly and one day you have no product and 3 days later you have an entire product ready. No, it doesn't happen like that, right? Anywhere across the world, across any domains, what happens is that you have a very structured way of taking it really slow, breaking a huge complex problem down into what? Into really smaller chunks of, chunks of problems and trying to attack them, trying to solve those. And eventually once you start solving all these tiny problems, it will lead to a very big solution wherein you have solved the overall problem that was at hand, right? That's a modular approach you take to designing your web application. I made it sound very simple at this moment of time, but understand that when you are designing an app yourself, you are going to require support from a web framework that provides this modular approach. And it's a very, very, very important point that you guys have to understand. There are concepts wherein you can have an API, an application programming interface, basically, wherein you can work with a website and you can give a lot of functionality to your customers, to your people, to your prospect who are coming to your website. Right? So think about a situation wherein there are new people who are coming onto your website, and let's just say you're an e-commerce website or something like that. What is the first thing that you would suggest? Of course, you show your website, show all the products. The next thing that you would do is you would get them to create an account for themselves, right? Wherein they can track all the orders that they have made. You can take a very detailed look at your own self, your own profile. It is basically giving you importance in that particular product. You can implement all of that easily with respect to Flask. And, whenever you provide the concept of logging in and logging out, users will have to register, right? It's not like anyone else can log into anyone else's account. It wouldn't make any sense if that was the case. So for logging in and logging out, you're going to have to be registered, and to be registered, you get your user ID, you get your password. If there's a profile section, you can go on to set a lot of things in your profile, and you can do a lot of things basically, right? That capability, where do you think it comes from? It comes from all of these parts where you're constructing an API for a web application, right? And whenever you think about providing any sort of additional functionality for registered users, now, if I just go to a website such as Amazon right now, the web app is still being served to me. But maybe if I log in, there are different things that will be shown. Now, if I just go to their website, if I open it in incognito mode, there's not a lot of things that it's going to basically, you will not be allowed to do a lot, right? I don't think you can probably buy a product without creating an account. I'm not really sure on that. But there are certain advantages of having a registration, right? So, be it in terms of you as a customer using it, or be it in terms of a person who has actually provided you the web application, trust me, it makes it easier for both the parties that's involved, right? Fantastic. Now, there are certain prerequisites to learning and using Flask, and there are two really, really important prerequisites. The first really important prerequisite sits with the fact that you have to have working knowledge of Python, right? Now, Flask is a web framework that is popularly used in a programming language like Python. So if you are brilliant at Flask, but yet if you cannot implement it in Python, that would be slightly problematic, right? So you're going to have some sort of basic understanding in Python, and then you get to start working on libraries. So for this course, do not worry if you do not have any previous experiences with Python or Flask. It is actually sort of okay, because at the end of the day, we're not really seeing a lot of code, or I'm not walking you through a web application at the moment. So the goal here is to get you guys comfortable with Flask, right? Now, take a look at the second prerequisite. The second prerequisite says you require hands-on experience with HTML. Yes, this is definitely a requirement. Now, whenever you're working with web applications, whenever you're working with websites, HTML is 99% of the time the foundation that the entire website gets to be built on, the entire skeleton for the website. So it really becomes important that you understand this, because again, down the line through the course, you will see that this is actually a very, very important requirement out there. Right? So guys, with this, we have completed our introduction to web frameworks. We know a good bit about them, and we have had an introduction to Flask, and we understand a good amount of Flask as well. Coming to a section where we will be discussing how you can install Flask, it's actually very, very simple, guys. I have only one slide to show you guys to install Flask, because it's really that simple. First step is you have to have Python in your machine, right? So make sure that you get the latest version of Python installed for whatever operating system that you have. You should know at this moment that Python almost supports every single operating almost every single operating system that's out there. So install the latest version which is required for you, and then you're going to require something called as an integrated development environment. It stands for an IDE in short. Something like Sublime Text, something like PyCharm, Visual Studio Code, Google Colab, whatever it is, right? You can have an environment where you write Python code, and once you've set that up, you have to create something called as a virtual environment in your project. Here's where things gets interesting. The way that Flask works, right? And the way that Python talks to Flask and your overall thing has to be involved. You're not just using Flask and Python here. You'll be using a browser. You would have had a server. You'll be using the server client architecture that I just told you. If you do not create a small virtual environment for the code to work in, any changes that you might actually make will interfere with the operating system itself. Yes, that's the reason we create a virtual environment where any changes that you make is bound only to those that particular environment. It doesn't affect or hurt anything in your real operating system, and I think it's very important for all of you all to work with that, right? So you have to create a virtual environment and to basically install Flask. It's one simple command: pip install Flask. You would already know at this moment of time, if you've used Python, that pip stands for pip installs packages, or it's a package manager that comes bundled with many operating systems that's out there, and one single command will basically help you set up and install this entire web application framework. And to check if you have actually basically installed it correctly and all of that, here's a small piece of code. You can find it in the official documentation as well. You have to just run that piece of code, and if it works fine without giving you an error, you have Flask ready, right? Now this simple application, all we're trying to do is we're importing the library, we're creating a small app, we have a root which says which consists of a function, right? We're not trying to create multiple web pages. We have just one page which shows us hello world. So every time this is created and it is running, it's a constant thing. It's a server that has to run in the background, right? And you can look at this here at the bottom. It says, hey, I am running the server on this particular web page or this particular IP address, right? So all you have to do is, it's basically self-reference. 127.0.0.1 is basically local reference that it provides, and if you just click on that, it will take you to a web page where it prints hello world or whatever it is that you're trying to return with your hello world function, right? So one simple piece of code, again 3 or 4 lines piece of code, extremely simple. And if you have your Flask set up really correctly, all it takes is you to run this piece of code, get your server set up, and eventually after you've run your setup, you have to understand that it's a server client architecture, right? When you open this website, you become the client, but on the back end, the server should be still running to show you that hello world, right? So this is a constant thing that keeps running and keeps running and keeps running. And when you decide saying that, hey, okay, I'm done seeing hello world on my web page, and you want to stop your server, you just get to stop this piece of code and it'll work, right? So guys, again, as I just told you, 2 simple slides of how you can install Flask and get away with it. Now we'll come to a quick section where we'll try to understand a little bit about Flask. One important question you have to always think about Flask or any other web development framework is, how easy is it for you as a developer to go about performing tasks such as debugging? Debugging is very, very important, as we have already discussed at this moment of time. And whenever you have executed a sample piece of code, right, the development server that you're basically working on, it will not work in debug mode. It will be working in production mode. It will be actually thinking that you have your app ready and ready to function. When you are saying, hey, this is not ready for launch, I'm trying to debug it, you actually activate something called debug mode. And activating debug mode does a lot of things for you. The most important thing is it enables automatic reloading. Now, whenever you do any sort of changes to the code, as soon as you come to your client side, you open the web page, it is ready for you to see. You don't have to rerun the code. You don't have to do a lot of different things. You don't have to keep refreshing it 100 times for every single change that you do. That has to be really advantageous, right? Automatic reload. You change something in the code, open your client, boom, changes are shown. This is hugely advantageous. You know, that huge, if I could just say, if I could put it in caps on the screen, trust me, I would. Now, what it also does is activate something called as the Python debugger. And as you already might know, Python debugger is very critical when you're working with Python, because it will give you a chance to take a look at what is happening. There's a concept called variable explorer, wherein you can understand what happens to what value stored in what address for what variable at what point of time. That's such a complex sentence that I just said, but the level of depth you can go to check what your variables are doing is only possible because of the fact that you have the Python debugger there, right? Now, how do you get into the debugging mode? That will be a very important question you're asking. And again, if you are running your server right now and if you're just happily printing hello world, all you have to do is stop the server, run this piece of code in Python, flask_env equal to development flask run. All you're trying to say is, hey, we are going to the debug mode right now, and you can bring all the advantages of debugging that Flask provides along with the feature of automatic reloading as well. That is debugging in Flask. The next thing is using HTML templates. Now, that hello world thing that you would have printed, and if you haven't done it, I really recommend that you pause this course, install Flask, and it takes 5-10 minutes at max for you guys to actually go on to print that hello world to make sure you guys are set up. Right now, when you have a simple application such as that, which is displaying only one simple message, you're not really using any sort of HTML attributes out there. But do you see a hello world every time you open Instagram? Not really, right? You see a lot of complex stuff, and all of these complex stuff that's being served to you basically uses the concept of HTML to display the information in many cases as well. There's a helper function that Flask provides. It's called render_template, and this function just talks to the entire Jinja2 template engine, and it brings forth this capability for you to display any information that you want and serve it in the form of an HTML file. Now, the biggest advantage that happens whenever you're doing that is for the fact that you can write HTML code and you can save it in .html file, and you can use this .html file to not just write the skeleton of your web application, but you can write a bit of functionality. You can add maybe 1 or 2 bits of logic there as well. That is how important HTML is to Flask. And alongside debugging and alongside HTML, you can already see that Flask is actually punching way above its weight in terms of the capabilities that it is providing to you, right? And then the next thing is setting up a database. Now, ladies and gentlemen, be it Flask, be it Django, be it any web application development in the entire world out there, your data has to be stored somewhere. It's very easy to say that, hey, you just throw your data in a server. What do you mean by that? Your server is not only providing compute capabilities, but it is also giving methodologies to store data in a structured manner. So a database will give you the capability to store almost all kinds of data that's being used by the application. You can have something called a structured query language. You can have these SQL and NoSQL databases through which you can integrate it, maybe something like SQLite or something, and eventually interact with the database easily. You require any data at any moment of time, you get it, right? That's how simple it should be. And one more important thing which goes unsaid, especially if you're a beginner, is you have to understand in your database, the data gets stored as rows and columns. The database does not look like Instagram, right? From the database, you pick up data, you transform that data, you convert the data from one format to another, and then it gets to look like an Instagram picture. You get it? So converting that rows and columns worth of data to make sure that it looks like what it is supposed to look is a conversion task that has to happen, that involves logic and processing, and there as well your server plays a critical role. Right? So that was a little bit of a hint for you guys to understand, to take a deep dive into understanding certain important capabilities such as debugging, database handling, and whatnot with respect to Flask. Now we come to a very, very interesting section where we can compare somewhere around 4 or 5 points of why Flask or maybe why Django can be better in many, many ways. Right now, let me be honest with you guys. I have used both Flask and Django for a really long time. And at this moment of time, I can tell you for a fact that Flask does some things really, really well. And Django does some things, again, in a very different way, but beautifully well, right? So it's like comparing almost apples and oranges, but if apples and oranges were to taste the exact same way but look different, I think it would be a very good comparison to wrap up our entire comparison between Flask and Django, right? Well, of course, that's not the case. So let's quickly take a look at a small yet very simple comparison between Flask and Django. The first point that we're going to be discussing is handling admin related tasks in the backend. If you are a person, if you are learning this course, you want to use Flask somewhere down the line, you want to make sure you're the admin and you're trying to build something, right? So what sort of capabilities is Flask providing you here where it may or may not be disadvantageous to that Django. Well, in this particular case, Flask does not actually provide any sort of direct admin related features, but Django does provide certain features to help you get started really quick. Now, do not jump ship at this moment of time thinking, oh, Django is providing admin facilities, let me just move there directly. Flask does not do what Django does inherently, but there is addable functionality to Flask which will eventually get you to do something very, very similar to this. Just that you will have to take a bit of extra time and you will have to spend some time not just creating the logic for that, but ensuring that logic talks to your already existing application. That is it. That one step gives Django a little bit of an advantage in terms of Flask, at least in this point. Then coming to the template that both of these frameworks use. Well, of course, as we already told you, the templating engine for Flask is Ginger 2, right? It is based, Ginger 2 is actually in itself is a library. The templating engine is based on Django's templating engine. Django comes built in with its own template engine, and to make sure that Flask is faster and more effective than Django, what people did is they separated out the functionality and they use Ginger 2 as a separate library rather than making Flask the heavyweight library that it is not, right? Flask is a very lightweight library as we discussed, and its lightness comes from the fact that we are actually using these other libraries in support of that. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Well, that's not a state for comparison, because at the end of the day, doing this makes Flask really faster. But if you're a person who's learning from scratch, where you have a template engine ready to go, in many cases, Django can be seen as advantageous as well there, okay? So, coming to the third point talks about visual debugging. Now, visual debugging becomes very, very important for you to not just look at a couple of lines of code aimlessly to try to figure out what went wrong, but if you have any sort of capabilities where it's highlighting where something went wrong, where it is giving you some sort of a visual cue to tell you that something is either right or wrong, right? This functionality, trust me, can be implemented both in Flask and Django, just for a fact that in Flask, it does not have any native support. As Flask itself, it does not provide any support for that, but Django does provide support for visual debugging. Is this a downside? No, it can still be implemented in a very different way, which still works, and sometimes it seems to be work better than what Django can provide, because again, you might have already seen, right? A lot of third-party accessories to your cars and bikes may give it a more flashy appearance and may make it look a bit better. That's the same case with respect to Flask here as well. Coming to the fourth point, which is development styles. Now, development styles are really, really interesting for you guys to understand and analyze, because here what the advantage that Flask does is Flask gives you a wide variety of tools and techniques to develop app. It's not saying that you have to follow only one way, you have to follow only one track, use only one tool, use only one method to work. Not really. Flask is giving you the biggest advantage in terms of, workable freedom to create your application. This is where Django has a downside. Django's workflow is actually considered to be very monolithic. It's only one way of how you can approach things, attack things, and solve the problems. In some ways, if you're looking for that kind of a simplicity, and if you're looking for that kind of non-complexity, another word for simplicity. If you're trying to work on that path, yes, Django is going to be a better flavor for you to go take a look at. But if you want that extra freedom, trust me, when you're a web application developer, this is exactly what you require. Any tool and technique that's given to you, it's almost like you accept it as gifts, because at the end of the day, you will use it somewhere down the line. It will help you, and without it, you'll be wondering down the line saying, oh, what would I have done if it weren't for that? That thought is very profound, and Flask again trumps Django in that particular point there. Coming to development styles. Development styles is where, again, this is, when you take it as a comparison point, there's no winner in this point, because Flask, again, is built for a very different purpose. Flask is built for rapid prototyping and rapid development. What I mean by rapid prototyping is that you have a concept in your mind, you have an idea in your mind, and you want to take that concept and idea, write and create a product as soon as possible. You want to make sure that your prototype, your working idea of your project, it went from your idea to something in Python. The process of taking your idea into a ready-made product makes very easy in terms of Flask, because it is giving you every push that it can from the back end to make sure you have these capabilities that makes it very easy, right? But then let's take a look at the story of Django here, because Django was not built for rapid prototyping. Django was not built to take your idea and rush it into a product. And of course, it's not the final product. You'll be working on it. But here, Django was built to take it easy. It was built to make sure that you have a structured, slow, one way of how you can work with your web application requirements. But sometimes now I know there can be some of you all who are watching this course who are hardcore Django users, and you might be saying, oh, not really, we have multiple tools and techniques and methodologies to use. Exactly my point here. Just like how Flask overcomes certain disadvantages it has in terms of Django also does overcome certain disadvantages it has in terms of what Flask can provide as well, right? So every single time it's a fight of these web frameworks, and each of the time that the winner basically is us as developers, because we get better products that we can use. Flask makes it more and more easier to work with, and Django sees that, and even they bring more functionality, more tools, and they make it even more easier to work with, right? So who's winning at the end of the day? It's we as developers who are finding the most fun ways to work with these tools and make our tasks easy, right? Fantastic, guys. With that, we have completed a small comparison with our Django versus Flask section. We take a look at the applications of Flask. So coming to the section where we are discussing the applications of Flask, again, this is a section where I definitely don't want to get myself, where I don't want to get carried away, because at the end of the day, there are so many applications, there are so many situations, scenarios, everything that we can talk about. But one thing you want to understand is that I've tried to condense all of these into one or two slides to showcase to you, saying, hey, everyone does use Flask to a good extent, right? Now, you might have heard of this social media website, even though it might not be as popular as other sites. Trust me, it's extremely popular. It's called Pinterest, right? Pinterest is where you go to check out these photos, these pins as they call it, and whatnot. And it's one of the really big social media sites out there in today's world. And one of the interesting facts is that the creator of Pinterest actually shared, saying that, hey, this was actually built using the Flask framework. We used Flask to build a good amount of Pinterest, and that is really amazing, right? You can open up a new tab right now and open Pinterest, and you will be fascinated with how beautiful that social media is, how beautiful that app is, and it gives you a lot of creative freedom to even analyze and understand what might have gone into building that tool, right? If that was interesting, take a look at the second point, right? When the US elections happened, the presidential elections in the year 2012 happened, Barack Obama's entire 2012 campaign was actually the website that he had for his campaigning. It used a lot of Flask as its main web development framework, right? So right from you tagging and seeing a couple of memes on social media, all the way to a presidential candidate who is, fighting for office, at the end of the day is using the same web development framework. So it should show you the massive jump around wherein you can go from domain to domain to domain. Even in healthcare, if you have any healthcare apps on your phone, open it up. I bet there will be something which uses all of these web development frameworks we're discussing, right? Fantastic. Now, to all of our international viewers, if you're in the United States of America, I don't know where else, Lyft is very popular, but Lyft is a very popular ride-sharing app, just like how we have multiple apps here in India as well. The fact is that these ride-sharing apps also make use of a lot of frameworks to work, but mainly all these frameworks still have to talk to your web development framework that's out there, which is basically Flask, right? So be it Pinterest, be it Barack Obama's campaign, or be it Lyft, or the thousands of other clients that there are who use Flask, you have to understand that these are some of the companies that make use of this really powerful framework, right? Companies such as Red Hat, Netflix, Samsung, Patreon, Uber, Airbnb, Nginx is basically a load balancing software that's very popular. You have Teradata, you have Mozilla Firefox. Ladies and gentlemen, even as a client side website, Mozilla will also make use of Flask to a good extent. What you see on your screen right now is trillions and trillions of dollars worth of business. We're not talking millions, we're not talking billions. Right now we're in the T League, we're in the trillionaire league here. And if all of these guys say, hey, we use Flask and we love using Flask to a good degree, and that it is helping our business grow to a good extent, You can take it from the trillionaires that for sure that this app, this development framework that we are trying to discuss is definitely adding a lot of positive value to all the domains and companies it's a part of, right? Very important for you to know. And then once we go on to discuss the applications of Flask, we have to definitely come to a section wherein we'll take a look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of the framework as well, right? Now, in this section, we can quickly take a look at a couple of advantages, and definitely you have to understand that the advantages always outweigh the disadvantages, but there are one or two disadvantages which is very important for you to know. We're going to be discussing that as well. First advantage, of course, the first point has to be rapid prototyping, because rapid prototyping is what everyone in the world today are after, and Flask is providing that on a silver platter. Why do you think people will say no to that, right? And then after rapid prototyping, the second point says that overall code base is comparatively simpler and smaller. If you are a programmer, if you're a developer, you should be smiling at this point of time, because knowing that you can have a same application, a really powerful application with really less code should make you really happy. And it doesn't mean that if your code is less, it gets complex. Not really. That's because you're using the magic of Python to work with, right? Python never gets really complex to work with. At least it has never for me or a couple of thousands of other developers who share the same opinion. But yes, it's important. The next advantage is that you can build highly scalable, complex projects. Now, it is very, very easy for you to think and assume to say, hey, I can build simple projects, fantastic. I can probably build complex projects, but how scalable is it? How do I take a small product that I built using Flask and how do I enlarge it to a point where it's scalable? Today, maybe your website is serving 10 customers. Tomorrow, your website might be serving 10,000 customers every single hour, right? There, you're going to have to require the capability of you have to have scalability, or else when you have 10,000 customers a day, your entire thing is going to crash and you have to sit and write another application again. Flask will give you the advantage of, removing all of that headache away. Now, the next biggest thing is for the fact that database integration is actually very simple and very straightforward in the terms of Flask, because again, there is so much data that's required for the app itself to work, and then there's user data that comes in, then there's the data for the server itself to work, then there's data for the server to talk to your client. There has to be certain way to ascertain that the client is the actual client. So there's certain information with respect to authorization data, right? There's a million types of data that has to be stored in these databases, and making your database talk to your server and your client is what the challenge that exists. Even though it sounds like a very simple challenge, sometimes it can get complex, but in the case of Flask, this entire process is very simple and straightforward for your usage, right? Fantastic. There are a couple of more advantages that we have to discuss. First of all, Flask, since it uses other external libraries to work really fully and to give its extensibility, it as a library has a very small core, and yet at the same time, it is so powerful and it's so intense to work with, right? And then another approach that you might be seeing in today's world is something called minimalism, as in smaller the better, lesser the better. Well, developers at Flask actually have used this approach in creating the tool itself for you to create better apps, because at the end of the day, if you are given like a million tools, million techniques and a ton of different things, you will rather be confused and you will be ambiguous to understand and figure out what to be used and all of that. But if I say, hey, this is exactly what you would need to build something like that, straightforward, you go there, you pick it up, you build your app, good to go, right? That approach is very much seen here. And then when you take a look at a lot of documentation that's available, any framework, let me tell you, if you're into data science, if you're into data analysis, you're into big data, you're into any domain that uses a bit of Python out there, all of these libraries, most of them are open source. They're free to use, amazing to work with. At the same time, they are backed by a very, very, very big community of talented, really talented, extremely talented developers and experts, right? So all these experts, they write down documents to make sure that you can go on to use the tools easily. They can give you tutorials, they can give you tips, they can give you techniques, they can give you a lot of workarounds, they can give you a ton of different insights about the frameworks, because those are the guys who have written the damn framework. Right? So at this moment of time, I have intense respect to all of these open source contributors, all of these communities out there, and everyone who's making this, a very, very interesting web development framework for all of us. Now, again, I am definitely taking these couple of seconds here to credit all of these community members, and you will understand once you start working with these applications, right? There will come a point in time where you will start appreciating all the hard work they do, because their hard work translates to you being easy at your your own work to creating the application. Right? Now, at the end of the day, it's not really all bells and whistles. Every advantage comes with a minute disadvantage, and we definitely have one or two disadvantages that you have to take a look at. Now, learning Flask is a it's a very good process. It's an amazing process. You get to learn a lot in a short amount of time. But the advantage there sort of peaks out, because at the end of the day, when you have to work on a really complex project, you have to have a lot of previous experiences working on simpler projects to actually set up an environment that's required for a larger project to work with, right? Now, it's not like anyone can go about working with a really complex project with just 1 or 2 days of training. Never happens, right? So this is slightly disadvantageous, because you might feel like Flask becomes very complex to use, but it not really is very complex. It's just that the domain itself is providing that level of complexity and challenge that you have to solve, right? And then when you're working on complex projects, maintaining your complex projects will actually get complex regardless of any library that you use. Unfortunately, in this case, maintenance becomes slightly a task if you're working with Flask as well. And compared to Django, when you take a look at it, Flask does not provide any sort of login mechanism built in, any sort of authentication where you can create yourself, where you can register, create an account, log in, log out, do anything, right? It doesn't come built in. You don't have anything that can give you all of that. If you want login functionality, you have to sit and write. Of course, there's multiple templates available out there, but you'll have to do something yourself. It doesn't come built in with Flask. You can still get the same functionality, or you can get better functionality out there, but in this case, you just have to work a bit for it, right? That again can be seen as a small disadvantage. And then when you take a look at the last point, it says migration of apps can be very difficult. Yes, migration of apps can sometimes be very difficult, because in this case where you might have used Flask to work with your app, maybe down the line you say, okay, maybe I have exhausted all the capabilities that Flask can give me. Now I want to jump ship to something else. Then it becomes very difficult for you to move your entire application from Flask to something else like Django. It's not a copy paste. It's not a drag and drop. It's months and months and months of hard work, I'm very sure, right? So that migration can be seen as very difficult. Of course, I don't blame Flask for this, because whenever there's a web development framework out there, no one expects their clients to be leaving and ensuring that they can leave, right? Every single product, every single developer out there ensures that they do everything. They focus their attention on keeping you into their product, into their system, into their ecosystem, right? So migration is difficult, because migration is you walking away from Flask, and that can slightly be disadvantage. Yes, it can be better to improve a lot of things with respect to customers, but the way it is the way it is, right? Well, with this, guys, we have discussed a ton of different things with respect to Flask. You've come to the end of this course at this moment. Quickly summarize everything we have learned. We started this course by taking an introduction to understanding what web frameworks are. We went right to the absolute basics. We took a look at web frameworks. Eventually, after understanding what web frameworks are, why are they important, where have you used, I gave you an ample amount of examples to help you understand that. We dived right into the heart of understanding what Flask is, why do we require it, where it is used, what it is good at, what it is not good at. And we had a section where we had to deep dive into Flask to take a look at it. We showed you how you can go about installing Flask and working with it, even verifying the installation as well. After that particular section, we ensured to take a look at understanding many things with respect to how you can, how easy it is to integrate a database with respect to Flask, how is debugging done, and we also compared Flask with respect to another king, another giant in the world of web development, which is Django, right? So you saw 5 or 6 points where at the end, I definitely say that the fight was very much, it stopped in there was no clear winner, because again, you can implement each other's functionality using third-party tools. One tool can do something better than the other. So again, comparing apples and oranges doesn't make sense, but that kind of a clarity is definitely required for you guys as beginners, as starters in the domain, right? Now, once we had the comparison, we dived right into the heart to take a look at the various applications that are there out of Flask. You saw that Flask is being used by companies who are absolute giants in the world today. And after that, we also ensured to take a look at a section where we discuss the advantages and disadvantages of Flask as well, right? So that is a section which will showcase to you all the good that Flask brings, and 1 or 2 disadvantages. Definitely something that you should know. It's very important for you to understand the disadvantages, because you will get to know at any point of time in the future if Flask will be the right tool for you or not at that moment of time, right? So guys, all in all, we definitely covered a lot of stuff about Flask, which will definitely give you a very good introduction, very good foundation for you to build on your Flask journey, right? So guys, thank you so much for watching. My name is Anirudh Rao, and I wish you all have a very nice day ahead. Thank you.
If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, I want to request you to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. This is done to make sure you do not miss out on any of the new updates or video releases from Great Learning. And of course, guys, if you enjoy this video, show us some love and do like this video. Knowledge increases by sharing, right? So make sure you share this video with your friends, colleague, and everyone who can make use of it. And at the end of it, make sure to comment on the video if you have any queries or any suggestions, and I'll be more than happy to respond to all of your comments.